This is a special YouTube-only review from the Game Schooler podcast. Intent to Kill is intended for ages 16 plus and may not be suitable for younger audiences.
This week's game is Intent to Kill, designed by Arthur Hoshikoff and incredible art by Owl Agency, published by Hobby World in 2024 with a North American release by 25th Century Games in 2025. Plays in an hour or less, 2 to 4 players, ages 16 plus. Doug, give us an overview of the game.
It's the early 1960s in the United States, and the Cold War is raging, and the people are shrouded in paranoia as bodies begin popping up throughout the city. In Intent to Kill, players enter the middle of an ongoing police investigation, with one player taking on the role of a notorious serial killer, and the other a detective determined to find answers and subdue the growing fear in the city. The game takes place over 5 structured rounds where each player takes unique actions to either avoid capture or narrow the suspect list. Each round begins with the murderer phase, in which the killer intimidates 2 civilians and then murders another. Intimidated civilians cannot be questioned by the detective, and the killer then selects a civilian to take out. The victim cannot be on the same block as the detective, and the victim must fit the murderer's motive. When a murder occurs, the killer swaps a civilian card with one of the chalk outline cards running down the right side of the board. After the murder occurs, the detective phase begins, with the initial response in which the detective moves their marker to the crime scene and disperses any civilians located there. The detective phase continues with the investigation. During the investigation, the detective may move up to 2 spaces for free, question civilians, and take building actions. When questioning civilians, the detective may ask yes or no questions, such as if the murderer is middle-aged, if the murderer is of large build, or if the murderer is short, to narrow down the suspect list. The tricky part is that the murderer, a pre-selected person of interest, and supporters of one of the social groups can lie if they want to. Every other civilian must answer truthfully. The building actions allow the detective additional opportunities to suss out information. The police station enables the detective to put a surveillance token on any civilian and ask whether this person can be killed based on the murderer's motive. The diner lets the detective question an unintimidated civilian in an adjacent block, and the hospital allows the detective to comfort intimidated civilians. And the fire station enables the detective to take a token from the social group stack and move its members 1 space. Then players move to the city phase, which allows the murderer and the detective to move civilians around the board and narrow down the social group of supporters. The game ends after 5 rounds. At this point, the detective must determine the murderer and the motive to win the game. If either is wrong, the murderer wins. Intent to Kill includes a wide variety of civilians, motives, and game modes to keep this cat and mouse game interesting each time you play. So, can you hunt the killer in time, or will you get away scot-free in your next game of Intent to Kill? Michael, what do you like about the gameplay in this one?
Well, Doug, before I answer that question, you need to answer a question for me. Which side am I referring to? Because there's 2 very different gameplays happening. Am I the murderer, or am I in the role of detective?
Yes, 2 very different sides. I think that's what is interesting about this game. And for me, I can't emphasize enough the marriage between the gameplay and the theme. I think I've said it every time after we've played this game. We both have been on both sides of the table, but the murderer feels like the walls are closing in the entire time.
Yep, especially at the midpoint of the game.
Yep, and the detective feels like they're pulling at straws all the way up until the end of like just...
maybe when you were the detective, I felt very confident.
Oh, yeah, and you with one
was wrong, but
one part of the investigation. I just feel like the pressure that you feel as the murderer is almost misplaced, because the detective is still like, he thinks I'm closer than I am.
Yeah.
Is kind of what it comes down to. And I love that feeling. I love feeling like you're in the hot seat and they're closing in on me. And I love the feeling of like, I'm not sure if we're getting anywhere, and we have the pressure to get this thing solved now.
Right. There's 2 very different games at play going on at the same time. The other thing that I really enjoy about the gameplay is the deduction aspect. It's in a lot of social deduction games, you can get there and have a perfect information. It is this person in this room. They are this age with this build, and this was the motive. Well, in an intent to kill, you could narrow it down. If you're asking solid questions and getting proper double verification, you can narrow it down to a 50% chance, maybe even a 33% chance. But because you have the person of interest involved in the game and the killer is able to lie, there's still some questions that you might not get answered, and so you're still left up to that sense of chance in the role of the detective.
And a social group that can also lie.
That's
so
right.
all of the civilians are divided into different social groups, whether that's government or.
Why'd you pick on the government first, Doug?
No reason.
Okay.
There's also immigrants. I didn't throw them out. But so there's a whole other group. What are the loners? Outsiders.
Outcasts.
Outcasts.
Yep. Outcasts. You got the medical community.
Medical.
You got jet setters because
Press.
Press. Yep. Media. Media.
So
yep.
one of those groups.
No board game media yet. Could be coming in a future expansion.
One of those groups is also aligned with the killer. And so it's not as simple of, oh, I asked this question and they told me that the murderer is tall. It takes a little bit to verify whether that's actually reliable information or not. Because you don't know if you've just asked the question to the murderer, the person of interest, one of their supporters. And even if you rule out a supporting class like, oh, well, all the press is fine. They're not liars. Except one of them could be the person of interest. So you're like, I better corroborate that with another member of the press.
Yeah.
And so your questions dwindle. You don't have as many questions as you think that you do or that you would in a normal game. It's like you're asking a good round is 3 questions.
I'd say that's a great round because part of the gameplay, it's not just deduction. You have to be able to, if you're in the police role, you have to be able to get the suspects into the right location. If you're the murderer, a term we don't often say on the Game Schooler podcast, so I was about to soften that to criminal, but for this YouTube release only, we'll talk about if you're the murderer, depending on your motive, you may be trying to spread some suspects, you may be trying to get some into a specific location so you can intimidate some. And I love that aspect of the gameplay as well, of moving the people around the city. How can, as the murderer, I find that a lot of fun. And then as the detective, you have those locations that can help you out. The hospital, the diner, they all have little abilities that can help as well. So I feel like each side of the table has a gameplay element that they're able to interact with in a way that's very unique and a lot of fun and encourages people to try those different roles, right? The first time I was the murderer, I didn't really care what you were doing with the hospital or the diner and then when I saw what you did in that firefighter role, which allowed you to reveal an additional social group, it's like, whoa, that's a pretty powerful ability. And then in the next game, when I was able, or when you and I were playing against, another friend of ours in our game group, and I was on that police side, I could really see how those different location abilities could aid in the deduction. So it's not just straight deduction. There's a few other things happening in the game that I really enjoy.
Yeah. And the things that make it work really well is the streamlined round structure, which is actually printed right on the board. And you can just follow along of like, oh, okay, this is the next step. Then we do that. Then we do that. So like, through the gameplay, it really does a good job of minimizing opportunities for mistakes, right? And then the other thing that I really like is how well the motives, I don't want to say match the theme, but how well they are laid out. So, for example, one of them is that you can only kill civilians that are alone in a block. So you're trying, if you're the killer, then at that point you're trying to separate people out. But not trying to make it obvious that that's what you're doing. One of them here, all victims have to be from a different social group. One of them is you can't murder anyone in the 8 blocks surrounding the detective. you cannot murder intimidated civilians. So they, all of these different things, and you play with 6 of them in a game, and you're trying to basically, if you're the killer, keep them around, as many of those viable as long as
Motives.
possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, the motives. And then if you're the detective, you're trying to move all of the citizens or civilians around in order to eliminate those opportunities, force somebody to have to murder somebody in the same group, or things like that, that I think really add a whole other level to this game.
Yeah, and as the murderer, you have that decision point about halfway through where, okay, I'm going to have to reveal and give up on 1 or 2 of those motives. But can I hold on to 3 of the motives going into the last round? And so there's that bit of planning, that bit of strategic thinking that's involved in the game as well. Again, that I think is added so that it's not just straight deduction.
Yeah, I want to move on to the production, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
The artwork in this game is amazing.
Yep.
This has such a distinct style and what I would call immersive world building at its finest. When I talked about the overview and its 1960s Cold War era, this artwork is dripping with that. You feel like you're transported when you see the civilians on there and just all of the artwork. You are lost in that moment. And I think the game does such a good job of that art tying the themes so well that I just feel so invested every time I play this game, is that you start picking up on traits and you're like, ooh, it could be the paper boy. And like, there's a level of, I don't want to say role playing, because it's not role playing. It's world building, where you start to, no matter which side you're on, you start using the characters in different ways that seems more personal, of like,
Yeah.
well, I can throw this person out there, or do this with, if you're the murderer, you're manipulating. It's like, well, I'm going to try and make them think that it's the paper boy or it's the mafia don or whatever. And if you're on the detective side, you're like, I think I can trust the nurse. But I'm not sure about the war veteran. And you're there, and they're not named. It's not Betty and John or things like that. They're basically profession or attributes about them or whatever. I think there's a cat lady in there or whatever. But they take on, the artwork is so good that they take on those roles, and you use them while you're playing in a way of inhabiting the game, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Oh, it does. Especially, I think the thing that's tough to dance around both, it really depends on the role, right? Because if you're the murderer, there's some bluffing that is occurring within the rounds. I'm listening to what the detectives on the other side of the table are saying. And if somebody makes a derisive comment about a cat lady, well, I'm going to use that to my advantage, right?
Yeah.
You're not giving anything away on that side of the table. And the detectives are reading into the actions, the subtle actions of how the murderer on the other side of the table is moving the characters around. What are they saying or not saying? And I think that the art integrates into that gameplay perfectly. There's some characters. There really are some characters on the board there.
All right, so moving on to things to be aware of. Obviously, there is the subject matter of this game. And what's interesting about it is that graphically, the only issue is potentially the motive cards that are describing the type of killer. So, for example, a killer, a terrorist, a vigilante, sadist, maniac, those words, the artwork on some of them isn't great, but it's not overtly gory or anything like that. It's more of just and there's no, the cards that you place out when a character is murdered is literally just a chalk outline
black
card.
and white outline.
So there's no graphic gore in this, and in a lot of ways, it's not much different than a game of Clue where somebody has died, outside of that you are a serial killer with a motive and those motives as terms. So those are the only things that come out which are like, yeah, I don't want to have that conversation with my child or somebody younger, but graphically there's nothing that's like, oh, this is intense, right?
Yeah, we in our house we play a lot of Dinosaur Tea Party. And after the initial play of the game that Doug and I had with Intent to Kill, the one barrier that prevented me from playing this game with my 9-year-old and my 12-year-old were the motive cards.
Yeah.
The motive cards are just they're too graphic. Now you would see it on any movie rated PG-13. You would see it on any Netflix or anything with a modicum of violence in today's culture and media. But the motive cards for me, and I'm just talking about for me as a parent and my kids, you might have a different way you roll in your house or with your students. That 16 did seem about the appropriate age. I have a 16-year-old in our house as well, and this is a game absolutely. We'll play this with my 16-year-old and my wife, and we haven't gotten to it yet. We will. We will be playing some Intent to Kill. Is there more that you wanted to say on that, or?
No, it's the only ironic thing is if they took off you obviously have to have a label for what the motive is.
Yeah.
But if they literally took off those words, it would almost be fine, because there's nothing wrong with the idea of like, well, you can't murder anybody in the 4 central blocks of the city. Like, that's not more intense than a werewolf where people are getting chewed up every night. If you said that was greed or other typical words for motives.
I agree with you that it might be it'd be fine for our audience, Doug, but in terms of the gameplay, and this kind of evokes that Son of Sam time.
Oh yes,
you need those words on there.
It makes it way more immersive.
It really does. Even just in the muttering back and forth about what the motive is or could be. Oh, is this a sadist? Or I don't know. I'm kind of feeling terrorist. I don't know. Look at that. Yeah, it could be. There's some of that detective speak that happens that those words really give that a sense of life. But
the other, a couple other things is that it's a 2 to 4 player game. Works great as 2-player. We played it once with 2 people on the detective team. So they basically say if you and one person as the killer. You can play on teams if you're playing with the full 4. I don't see any reason why you couldn't have 1 killer and 3 people on the detective. So it's pretty flexible on that front, but certainly phenomenal as a 2-player game. The other thing I'll point out is that it can be intense playing as the murderer. And some folks won't like that pressure. If you play
have
games,
to bluff and lie and cheat. You have to.
And if you don't like that feeling of everybody's looking at me, I'm the one, and they're catching me, and that stress, that's a stress that some people don't like in a game. So be aware of that.
And others love it.
Exactly. And it was interesting because it's like, it's not my favorite thing in the world, and I think but at the same time, I can't really say, oh, I'd always want to play as a detective. Like, my heart was beating fast, and I'm like, oh, Michael's right about to get me. And it was like, I don't want to get caught. I don't want to get caught.
You did a nice job of hiding your motive.
But I can see where some people just would not like that. The other thing is that, we're just talking about the very basic part of the game. There are 6 motives it tells you to start with. There's 6 more. There's a logic variant that is the base one. There's an intuitive variant I haven't even looked into, and there's a level that has clue tokens and a whole other smattering of different things. I thought the original just straight base game start out of the box was so immersive as it is. I don't even know.
It's plenty. It was plenty. And you done there? Can I jump in?
No, yeah.
Because even in that base game with the logic module, you have an ability called surveillance, where if you're the detective, you could put a character under surveillance, and there's enough game elements and mechanics in that base that I think will satisfy most groups. I mean, if you're unlocking all the other stages of the game, I just don't know a whole lot of people that are repeating gameplays like this over and over and over to get to that level. But
Yeah, yeah, it's certainly there if you want it, and if you don't, you're going to have plenty of gameplay either way.
Yeah.
Even just swapping out the motives, I think would make a big difference. I don't know if it makes sense to talk about skills in a game like this based on the audience that's playing it. However,
I'd like to go ahead.
However, I think it is a critical thinking masterclass, essentially.
And before we jump into skills, I want to go back to one thing to be aware. How was the rule book? Because your teach was flawless, but how was the rule book?
I think it's
and
pretty
getting into
straightforward.
it? Solid.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think I had any questions after it, and there was very little look back into the rule once we started playing.
Yeah. Sorry, back to you on skills.
Yep. So I think this is a critical thinking masterclass. I mean, you have problem solving, observation is huge in this game, decision making, processing information. There's a lot of thinking and on both ends of, okay, what, each side is trying to either prevent or gather information, and the way that you observe and handle that is it's all of those critical thinking skills.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I love from round 1 to round 5, and then you can choose to even go into a 6th round, right?
Yeah, the murderer can avoid basically not murder somebody one round, and then move it into
push
a 6th round. Which, when we were playing with a buddy, we ended up, I don't know if you were going this way.
Yeah,
we pushed him into a corner where he either. Basically, if he didn't murder somebody, we would know the motive, and if he did murder somebody, we would know the motive.
Yeah,
which was kind of a cool corner to get trapped in.
Well done, police. And that leads me to my first skill out the gate is competition. This is a game that develops healthy competitive habits as 2 or more parties compete for a goal or reward that isn't shared.
Healthy minus the murder, of course.
Well, hey, you got to catch the criminals. If you're on that side of the table, it's really healthy. I'm not going to talk about the murdering side of the table. Then you're just devious and you should have to leave your game night.
Yeah.
But the competition in this game is tense. And longtime listeners of the show know that I love a good competitive game. And from the moment on either side of the table, though I feel like the detective ramps up the competition as the game goes on, and I feel like the killer, you come in competing, and it stays that way, and then it gets even more and more tense as you get into rounds 4 and 5. So that's another skill, especially with repeated plays. If you're introducing the game to new people, that is certainly in the game, as well as the critical thinking.
Yeah. I mean, for example, a basic skill, which is in a lot of games, it's one of our core skills, processing information. A game in which players must examine and analyze information. That is happening all game long, nonstop. And the focus in this game, like, this is not a game where you
can't have the ball game on in the background.
No, and even if it is, nobody's paying attention to it, right?
Well,
I mean,
if they are, they're not doing a very good job at whatever they're supposed to be doing in the game.
That killer's
you have
getting
a job to do in this game.
Yeah, that murderer's getting away with a 7th and 8th murder if you're,
or else they're getting caught in the 2nd round.
Yeah. But it was a close game. It was worth it. Any other skills you want to talk about, Michael?
No, those were the 2 that I wanted to bring to the table: competition, and you talked about critical thinking.
All right. Any final thoughts for you, Michael?
I do have a few final thoughts, Doug. I'm looking at where I put them in my run sheet here because I wanted to come in strong on them as I do a stall in the business. Where did I put that? It was a good one. What's your final thought, Doug?
I think Intent to Kill does a phenomenal job of putting me into character without feeling like a role-playing game. Yet every playthrough feels like it's been plucked from a Hollywood writer's room.
Kill or catch the killer in this thriller.
In Manila.
No!
All right, so that's your final parting words. Let's hear them again.
Kill or catch the killer in this thriller.
All right, that's our special game this week, Intent to Kill from Hobby World.